A lot of people think Irsu straight up never existed, historically speaking. Even if he did exist, all we have is his title, not even his name. Irsu just means self-made man, though this was a negative thing in their culture, not a positive. And we know that he invaded Egypt. But that isn't a lot to build a character on, but Creative Assembly seems to have gone in a very interesting direction with him, and as much as it seems to be a barbarian stereotype, it has a bit less historical grounding than you might expect. You see, we're all familiar with the idea behind Irsu.
Wrong! Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women. That is good.
And that's fine, it's a good character type, and we know so little about the historical figure that we really can't say that CA is wrong in assigning Irsu this personality. But perhaps surprisingly, given that the Bronze Age collapse was all about literal barbarians tearing down whole civilizations, history doesn't paint a picture of sadistic psychopaths who killed for pleasure and destroyed for the sake of glory. Instead, the barbarians were, by and large, refugees, not so much looking to destroy as they were hoping to clear out the best land they found so that they could themselves settle there, having brought their livestock, their seeds, their families, and possessions with them from lands even more dead and chaotic than the Levant. Now, destruction happened, don't get me wrong. According to archaeology, it seems to have happened quite a lot in this period. But it wasn't barbarian madness, there was almost an etiquette to it all. Armies, you see, were sent out for many reasons. A combat would legitimize a leader, victory would discourage your neighbors from attacking you, and of course wealth, either in the form of taking over a new land or merely extracting tribute or plunder from the neighbors, was always in view, and all these reasons and more can come into play at the same time. But once the army arrived at the target, be that a tiny settlement or a massive city, an intricate two-party dance always began. The attacker wanted to take the stuff, but didn't want to lose too many men. They didn't want to lose too much time, and they really didn't want to work too hard. That's just human. The defender, meanwhile, didn't want to lose anything, or if losses were certain, they wanted to minimize their losses. And so if the defender is much weaker than the attacker, the defender will typically open negotiations and offer a certain amount of tribute in exchange for submission. The idea being that the attacker would rather have some stuff at minimal effort rather than a bit more stuff but while taking casualties. However, if the attacker were to be offered such a deal and then burn the city anyway, they would find that no future cities would offer them easy submissions, and they would get bled further and further with each new campaign, even if they achieved victory. So there definitely were real incentives for both sides to avoid conflict. And indeed, much modern archaeology has been focused on how the mass population movements of this era were in many ways not invasions, but peaceful migrations. The Aramaeans seem to have entered Syria and coexisted almost peacefully with the Hittite cities they found there and integrated very well with them. And many of the Canaanite entries have very little archaeologically attested destruction attached to them. Now, we shouldn't overstate the peacefulness of all this. They may not have been maddened barbarians building skull thrones for the blood god, but the incentive for peace was fundamentally the threat of extreme violence. The more a defender resisted a conquest, the more extreme the ultimate sacking would be. This was an accepted and understood aspect of ancient Near Eastern warfare, and it wasn't enforced by some sort of ancient Geneva Convention. Rather, the incentives faced by the attacker caused it. Resistance needed to be discouraged, and so a violent sack was a message to other potential targets to surrender peacefully, a tactic perfected in the bloody propaganda of the later Assyrians. Also, the more a city resists, the more that resistance needs to be stamped out to ensure the future peace, a lesson painfully learned by the Assyrian king Tukulti-Ninurta, who revered the culture of Babylon so much in the 1200s that he spared the city after their tremendous defense against him, and ended up bogging his whole empire down in an Afghanistan or Vietnam-style quagmire, which directly resulted from his failure to crush the resistance out of the city initially, as was done with all his other conquests. And of course, there was also a psychological component. The longer and harder you'd been struggling against a city, the more you're going to take out all your rage and frustration on the people once you break through the gates. Now that last bit, the rage and frustration, that doesn't show up in a Total War game. The player, you fight the battles, you enjoy the battles. You get a better battle, maybe you like that city a little bit more. That's not how it happened in the real world. And of course, on the other side of things, there's no peaceful surrender of cities in a Total War game. That's just not part of the game mechanics. And so some of that dance, both the psychological anger and the pragmatic surrendering of cities, is simply missing from the Total War game. Pitched battles, meanwhile, as in army to army out in the fields, were historically avoided whenever possible. That's a whole lot of casualties for not a lot of plunder, unless that pitched battle opens the door directly to a city somewhere. There were times in history when fighting was pursued for its own sake, and battlefields were chosen away from towns and were extremely glorious. But we don't hear any sentiment like that in the Bronze Age Near East. War in this time is the domain largely of cold pragmatists who much prefer mere violence to competitive conflicts. Now anyway, this all may be a tangent, but it's not actually a complaint. Getting back to Irsu, his voice actor is clearly having a fantastic time playing a character straight out of the Khornates or Norsicans from Total Warhammer. But watching the campaign gameplay, he isn't actually a roving despoiler. Irsu's campaign is being run here, intentionally or not, in the mold of an ancient Near Eastern king. The kingdom has been established by the time the video starts, we're 40 turns in, they say, and its frontiers are secured, and then Irsu is going out not to perpetually expand the borders. You see, the logistics of ancient government made large borders extremely difficult without a river system. It's part of why the Assyrian Empire was so impressive. That was the first anyone had ever in history spread out as big as they had, and that's a few hundred years from Total War Pharaoh. But rather, Irsu is going out to take wealth of all sorts from outside the kingdom and bring it into the kingdom. There's a fundamental economic maximum to how much can be produced in an ancient territory. But if you reach out with your armies and you're taking the plunder from other territories, that's a much more cost-effective way, a much more economically profitable way to increase your wealth, unless you're on the Nile or the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, where the economics are different. This is just a poor place, and you get more from plunder than you do from actual building. In this case, Irsu isn't destroying cities because he loves destruction. It's an economic thing and it's a political thing. They resisted him, and so he wants them weakened so they can't threaten him, and he wants to take all their good stuff. Now, all their good stuff does include slaves and, I'll be honest, worse, that seems to be getting glossed over, but I can't blame Creative Assembly too much for sanitizing what was a pretty brutal era for the general audience. And so the designers have built a game system which incentivizes historical style kingdom building, without the player necessarily knowing that this is historically how ancient kingdoms looked and economically functioned. Now, from an historical perspective, there are still issues with the game. I do have questions about Ramses and Bey in particular. We've looked at that in previous videos, and I still am waiting to see how my favorite Hittites get portrayed. Probably in the next couple weeks they'll release that video. And of course, no ancient battle commander ever had anything close to the amount of unit control that everyone in this game gets. But as of this preview, I'm more optimistic than ever about this game, both as a representation of the era and just as a Total War game. On the representation side, Irsu is clearly meant as a stand-in for a wide variety of Canaanite invaders who appear in this era, from the forgotten folks like the Geshurites and the Avites, to the Amaru of the previous generations and the Arameans of the next. And from that standpoint, he has all the potential of those groups baked into him quite well. If anything, there should probably be a few more Irsu clones on the map, because the Canaanites fought each other rather more than the Hittites or Egyptians. But I am pretty pleased with what I saw in general. And of course, all the art is pretty well on point. Now, some people don't like the style overall. I'm frankly not that aesthetically sophisticated. It looks fine to me. Some people don't like it. That's fine. But it definitely looks well executed for the most part. And the costumes, armor, and architecture continue to impress me, particularly as we get out of Egypt and into the places I'm a bit more familiar with, and I can say, oh yeah, I've seen that in actual ancient portrayals of the ancient world. I will make one criticism, one which I think really will undermine a portion of the game's realism, and that is that the player in this preview had 3 mostly independent armies impossibly far away from each other. One's down in the Delta, one's in Canaan, one's in Anatolia. Now, while great empires, talking the Hittites and Egyptians at their peak, did sometimes have generals tasked independently with modest-sized forces, having large forces well away from your king, it looks like each one's about a third of the whole army. You just didn't do that. You'd at most have your king and maybe your heir running around separately, and because it was incredibly risky, you would never have an outsider come in and rule a major army like this. Those 2 other generals, Dagon and Hadad, would historically have basically never actually stuck with Irsu's kingdom in any meaningful way. Not in the Bronze Age Near Eastern context, especially not in the Canaanite context. Having gained control of these armies, they would have split off. They would have taken their own towns, carved out their own kingdoms. In fact, Irsu would never have actually given those armies freely, knowing that this is almost certainly what would have happened. And this matters, because the lack of internal politics, aside from the pre-scripted pair of civil wars, makes expansionist powers much more stable than they were historically. And it makes expansion overall much easier as well. This is a time of collapse, not a time of stability and expansion. It's a compromise for the game, no doubt about it. And if I'm going to be honest, it probably makes the game a lot more fun to build a big empire in the midst of the Bronze Age collapse, but it noticeably decreases the historicity of the ultimate outcomes. Now that said, I should end with a positive note. Because history aside, the gameplay is looking fantastic. They've taken a lot of elements which have been in the game previously, like the fires, the weather, the night battles, and a lot of little quality of life improvements, and it looks like they've built maps that really take advantage of them, offering what appears to be a good amount of space for actual tactics, and a unit roster that appears to be fairly diverse without overloading with strongly differentiated unit tiers. It seems possible to beat a much wealthier enemy with good tactics, and troop selection is really going to start to matter even in the endgame, at least from what we can tell. Off on the campaign map, there's a bunch going on the campaign map, which seems like it's going to add a lot of depth to just the whole immersion. It's not just modifiers, maybe it is. Maybe these things all come out to be just, I want 5% of this and not 5% of that. But with the gods, with the outpost systems, with all the little things they've put in there, I'm pretty optimistic. At least, I'm optimistic based on what I've seen in the video. Ultimately, we're all going to see in October, and hopefully all of our optimism will be fulfilled and then some, and we'll end up with a fantastic game that gets the enthusiasm and player base to expand into Mesopotamia, which, as a Mesopotamian history podcaster, that's really what I'm looking for. Anyway, that's my knee-jerk thoughts to the vid that just dropped this morning. Let me know in the comments what you're thinking about Irsu and about the game in general. Are you as optimistic as I am, or are you still riding the Doom train with the cool kids on Reddit? Also, if you haven't yet, take a look at my other videos. I've covered now all 8 faction leaders, as well as background on the 19th dynasty in Egypt and the entire Hittite Empire. Link to that playlist should be on your screen right now, somewhere if I did the YouTube right. More videos will be coming, though maybe not right away, as real life has kind of overwhelmed me a bit, but definitely make sure you subscribed here because there's a lot more where this came from. Thank you for watching.